This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
New leadership at the Memphis Area Transit Authority and what it means for the future of public transportation in Memphis tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Bill Dries, senior reporter for the Memphis Daily News, in for Eric Barnes this week. Our guests tonight are Ron Garrison, President and General Manager of the Memphis Area Transit Authority, and Charles Chooch Pickard on the Memphis Transit Authority Board. Gentlemen, good evening. Let me start first, Ron. You're how many months into the job now as President and General Manager?
About 1 3/4.
Okay. All right. So let's start with a broad overview. Where do you see us as being in terms of public transportation, and where do you think we need to go, let's say, over the next 5 years in terms of that?
Well, there's a number of things that we could talk about in that regard, but I'd like to see us be the employer of choice. You know, a place where folks want to work and want to be. And where we are now, I'd like to improve upon that. I'd like folks to say, wow, that bus operator is so excited about his or her job, and they have the best customer service. You know, maybe in a few years, we might look at a tri-state transit authority. We're interested in expanding the trolley service, or might even do some nodal streetcar in the future. But Eric, it's something we could talk about a lot. There's a number of things that we can do here. But what I want everyone to know is, it's a new day, and we're going to do things working with, with the chamber, with the economic development, with the different groups, the Downtown Memphis Commission, to make Memphis a great place for transit and for our customers and our visitors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Chooch, how long have you been on the board at this point?
About 4 years.
Okay. So let me get your take on this from a different perspective. Where do you think we are, and where do you think we need to be in about 5 years?
Well, several years ago, the mayor, Mayor Wharton, decided we really needed a change in MATA and in public transportation. So he slowly started replacing people through the board. And this past year, we actually had 4 new board members. And this came around the same time when we were doing the search for the new GM. And it was a perfect opportunity for us to kind of step back and evaluate where we were and just decide that we needed a change agent that would come in and help us turn the organization around.
Mm-hmm.
We do recognize that we have some issues in customer service, and in my mind, that's the cheapest thing to fix. If we have nice bus drivers that are happy to do their job, as Ron said, we'll have happy customers.
Right. It's been a while since I've looked at the statistics, but the last time I looked, it was something like 85% of the ridership on the Memphis Area Transit Authority are people who have no other alternatives for transportation, don't have a car. This is how they get to work. This is how they get to most, if not all, of the places that they're going. Am I on the mark with that, Ron?
I think it's somewhere around those numbers from what I've seen. But those numbers change from time to time. And we're hoping that some of the things that we do for the community and working with the planners can have an even more diverse number. And we can have some riders that maybe didn't try using transit before.
Right, because when people talk about improving public transportation in Memphis, it's not as simple as saying, okay, tomorrow or a month from now, we're going to redo all of the routes and we're going to start all over. You can't do that when 85% of your ridership needs that bus service every day in some form just to get to work.
Absolutely. And that's, we have to remember that foundation. Our customers that use this for living, for seeing the doctor, visiting their mom, going to work, shopping. And you can do things with what we have now to attract new customers and to make sure that we, have our base there for the folks that need transit for their day-to-day use.
And Chooch, where do you see us go? I mean, how do you build in ridership with the core group that has a choice and that chooses to ride the bus?
Well, I think we need to overcome some of the misperceptions about MATA. I mean, we certainly have a lot of challenges, but I think if we can market MATA to people who do choose to ride the bus by maybe taking a few of the routes that run through Midtown and doing some promotion with them, we have opportunities out there for particular routes that are actually really good routes to attract those choice customers, and I don't think we're promoting them well. We have the number 2 that runs from downtown through Midtown, through Overton Square into Cooper Young, and the folks that are hanging out in those neighborhoods and enjoying themselves in those neighborhoods aren't taking advantage of that route. So I do think we need to look at routes like that and look at the times that are on them. It probably stops too early for some of those customers, and frequency of those routes. But you can't just focus on those choice customers, because we do have people, as you said, 85% of the customers do need it. So it's a balancing act. We do need those choice customers to increase revenues.
Okay, and that kind of gets us into the concept of bus rapid transit, BRT, which is called in the industry, so to speak. We've tried that with a Poplar corridor route, and we've tried it with Elvis Presley Boulevard too, and both of those, I believe, have had some adjustments over time, over a pretty short period of time. Where are we? Well, let's start with an explanation of BRT.
Well, BRT, bus rapid transit, surprisingly, the best bus rapid transit that's in the world is in South America. And they started it because it's something that works very well. It's kind of like light rail or modern streetcar, but it costs a lot less. And if done properly, it can be just as much fun, very good for the businesses, and move a lot of folks quickly to their destinations. So there's been a study done, and we're looking at BRT in a number of areas. And you mentioned that we're trying it, and where is it? Well, we've worked with the city, and we got a grant to do light prioritization along those 2 corridors, Elvis Presley and Poplar. And most of that's in place on Poplar, and we're working to finish up Elvis Presley. It costs a little bit of money. So when we do that, what we found in the study is you can already reduce your travel time on Poplar just by using just the light prioritization by 20%. So that's something that we're excited to do and we want to put in place. We have to have the right infrastructure in place and the right type vehicles. For example, there's a bus that has an accordion in the middle. We call it an articulated bus. They carry a lot more customers and have more standing room. So those type of vehicles in a more modernized version work real well with bus rapid transit. We may look at putting in stations where the platforms you can walk right onto the rapid transit vehicle at certain locations. And we may look at how we might do the ticketing to make it faster to get on and off the service, which then also reduces dwell time, or the time that the bus waits, and gets people to where they need to go.
Right. So it's a straighter shot. It's fewer stops than you might have now, and it's on these major arteries.
Right.
Chooch, in terms of where we've been with that, it's important to note that the Elvis Presley Boulevard route or corridor was not necessarily a thing about tourists. In fact, it wasn't about tourists. It was about work centers in that area and linking people to them in the larger Whitehaven area, as I understand it.
Correct.
So how have people embraced the concept in the short time that we've had it?
Well, we've actually tried a couple different things over the years. The Poplar Avenue is probably the best example that most people have ridden down. The 50 is the most popular route in the city. And a couple years ago, we tried an express route that had less stops, but we named it the 22. I think that was very confusing for some people instead of calling it the 50X or the 50EXP. And I think, honestly, that had the biggest impact on us. We had to actually cancel that route because we didn't have enough riders on it. And we thought it would be the opposite, that we'd have more riders wanting to get downtown faster. And didn't work out for us. So we're looking at that again. And also at the time, we did not have the light prioritization. And so I think putting all the pieces together and marketing it well will have a bigger impact.
Right. I want to get both of your thoughts on this, and that is public transportation on buses has to be a challenge here because we live in a city where you can get most places in a half an hour. And when you're in your car, you're going there with yourself, maybe a few other people, but you're going to one destination. A bus is a different proposition because it's making stops for several people, lots of people, if the system's working the way that it should. Chuch, I'll start with you. How difficult a challenge is that to overcome? And is the goal necessarily to get people on a bus trip at their destination in a half hour? Is that realistic for people to expect?
That's tough to say if we could do it. Our biggest challenges really come from the fact that we're not a very dense city. Most people don't realize we have almost the same population as Detroit, and they are half the size of us. So when people think about how spread out you hear Detroit is and unpopulated, we have half that density, and so that makes it very difficult for transit. We're also, I believe, that the cheapest parking of any downtown our size, and so if it's very cheap to park downtown. If it's roughly the same price to park your car each month as it is to buy a bus pass for the month, I might not have that incentive. Until gas prices start to increase, it's an uphill battle for us.
Right.
So the convenience of a bus is not there in Memphis like it is other cities.
Okay. Ron, from having worked in this business in other places, your perspective on how unique we are or how unique we are not in terms of that regard, the half-hour commute time roughly that we see and the challenges that poses for public transportation.
It's harder now than it used to be. Transit across the country was severely cut when funding changed in the 80s, and Memphis had to deal with that as well. So the sprawl, that Chuch is talking about and you alluded to, is a problem everywhere. But the other thing is that most cities have built their roads maybe not the best way for people to travel or to use transit. And a grid network always works better. And we hear one of our board members talking about that quite often, and he's right. So we need to think about what we can do now, what we can do for our kids and our grandkids. And that means as a community, we look at beginning to change or improve upon what we haven't been doing so well over the last 80 years, and transit is an integral part of that. Is Memphis different? From what I've seen, yes, it is very different. Will we be able to be all things to all folks? Probably not. But I know that if we begin to look at how we develop and grow, and look at a regional vision, we can do nodal growth and interconnect those, and that'll work better for people that want to get to their doctor's office or to work and other things. And then you can do flex route service so that it's not as expensive, so you can get into those areas where folks need to go, and feeders into those nodal stations. That's what I see as the future of Memphis. And in the meantime, we can improve upon our on-time performance and the image of MATA, and improve how well we work with all of our partners. That's one of the first things that Chuch and I have talked about and the board wants me to do is working with our partners so that we can understand better what the community needs so we can work to that end.
Mm-hmm. Would a switch to a pure grid system work, or is a grid system for Memphis a matter of adapting it to what we have now and some of the other concepts that you talked about?
I've worked on a grid system in other cities where it was difficult, like Memphis, and you can improve some of the travel times because that's one of the barriers to transit, improving the travel times so that it's closer to how it would be, using your car. Mm-hmm. We could do some of that here, and some of the short range plan, addresses that. But to do a truly grid system, we'd have to slowly change, and build our streets a little bit differently. But I think it's something, from what I've seen to date, that we certainly can improve upon.
Okay. All right. Chooch, you've in the time you've been there, I think you've certainly been at enough board meetings where the grid system has come up. What's your view on moving toward that?
Well, I came on the board thinking, well, why don't we have a grid system here? And actually, at our first board retreat, we learned a lot about it. And it is more expensive, and in a time when we're losing, typically, certainly 4 years ago, we were losing funding from the city every year. And so to go to a system that's going to cost more, we knew was going to be difficult. It's not just the street layouts, it's the number of buses you need. It's getting people used to not taking a bus all the way downtown from southeast Memphis and then taking another one all the way to northeast Memphis. It's helping our customers realize that if we are more grid-like, you are going to have to transfer. We don't have the paper transfers anymore, so sometimes when you use that term, it's a little confusing, but you would have to get off of one bus and get onto another, whereas right now, our customers are used to taking a long ride on a bus downtown. And we have adjusted some routes to have a few more north-south routes, and as Ron mentioned, it is a part of how our street system is laid out. We don't have as many north-south streets, so we're trying to utilize them as best we can, but there is an education factor of how getting customers to realize that we're not eliminating routes, we're rearranging them, and if you learn the system, it can be much more efficient.
And from what I've seen in other cities, riders in other systems mix and match their transportation options more than perhaps we see here. But I think MATA has seen that somewhat with the bike racks in the short time that they've been on the buses.
Every time we get a report from staff, the number of bike riders that are using the bus increases.
Ron, your thoughts on what you've seen with the bike rack and what that means in terms of how consumers are changing their habits?
I think they are changing their habits, and there's things that we can do partnering with the enthusiasts to do even more. They now have a bike rack, which they've been in the works for decades, that can hold 3 bikes, and it's being tested in a number of areas, and that works well. But we saw like 3,000 that we know of. There's probably more bikes on racks just last month, and it's increasing every month. That's a pretty good number compared to a few or 0 when we started. So I know that that the MPO and others in the community are making some new bike paths, and you see more and more streets as they're repaved. They have a bike lane, so it's another option for folks that gets them to work, gets them a little exercise too.
Right. In terms of options that are out there, let's talk about the trolley. You just got a peer review report on the trolley system and the fires that we had on 2 trolleys earlier this year, and you have said you still want to bring the trolleys back. You want to get that system back up and running at this point, but obviously you need to look at the training, you need to look at the maintenance issues, as well as the physical condition of the trolleys and what are the options for that. So give me a quick update on where the trolley system is at this point.
Well, the American Public Transit Association, which is the APTA peer review, that's not anything that's required. We initiated that because we thought it was the right thing to do. APTA is an association of pretty much all the large transit entities, so they had the expertise to help us with that. No one came in and shut the system down. We did that for safety, and it happened before I got here, so MATA did the right thing. That said, where we are, we're working with the Tennessee Department of Transportation and the federal government, the Federal Transit Administration, along with APTA's recommendations. We brought in one of the best experts, Pearson Brinkerhoff, one of their engineering safety experts, along with one of their fleet person, and we're bringing in 2 more, to do a complete assessment of each vehicle and then to safety certify them so that they're safe to go on the street. Running those trolleys 14, 16, 18 hours a day is probably may not happen in the future, not those trolleys, but at least we want to incrementally get them safe so that we put 1 out and then 2 and then 3. And the assessment started this week. You know, it started on the 7th of October. The consultants are leaving today, and they're bringing a whole team back probably in 2 weeks. So over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we should know where we are, and I'll be able to say, this is what we're going to be able to do, you know, safely for our community. Going forward, you know, we'll partner with, you know, with Memphis and with the businesses and the federal government and TDOT to see about getting funding to do more and other things with the trolleys in that area that I think will be very good for the community.
Right, and I would imagine you've heard a lot from people who really like the vintage look of the trolleys, because there were several options at the outset that you could do. You could try another restoration of some of these old trolleys. Some of them are 100 years old, some of the bodies of them. Or you could go with a modern looking new trolley, or you could do new trolleys that look like they are vintage trolleys.
Right. So what's important in Memphis? You know, if we look at that area, what's important to the businesses, to our citizens and customers that use it, and to the tourists. And an open air vintage trolley is a different thing. You have a connection with the pedestrians. You have a connection with the street and the sounds and the businesses, and everyone seems to like that. So going forward, before we do anything, this would be something we work very closely with the board and the businesses and the community on what will be the next iteration. I think for that area, it might be a new vintage trolley that has all the sights and sounds and open air, and maybe we could do air conditioning or something in it to make it a more pleasurable ride in addition to that.
Chooch, what have you received in the way of input, particularly about trolley night? Because obviously these are the vehicles that put the trolley in trolley night for South Main.
You know, I attend most trolley nights, and attendance has actually been decent. I don't believe actually most of the people that attend trolley night take the trolley down there. A lot of people don't realize that it is free on trolley night and that you could park in the core downtown and take the trolley down. But I have heard a lot about the businesses down on South Main. I'm friends with several business owners there, and they are hurting. They're begging me, what can you do to get them back? And, you know, my response is always, we're working as hard as we can to get as many back as we can. You know, we've had to literally manufacture parts to replace. And safety's number one, though. You know, as important as our tourists are to these businesses, you know, loss of life would be, you know, way more devastating than the effect it's having now. So safety definitely has to be our first priority, and I go down to the trolley barn every once in a while and check things out, and we're making progress. It's just it's a slow process.
Right.
We have two government bodies to please in the end of this to put them back on. So that's a challenge.
All right. About 2 minutes left in the show. Ron, a quick take. The idea that the Madison Avenue trolley could go to Overton Square has kind of always been circulating out there, more so now that the square has really taken off. I take it if that happens, it's a long-term process at best. A lot of talk with merchants about what the impact would be on businesses if the Transit Authority chose to go that way.
The Transit Authority would choose to go that way if that makes sense from a planning perspective. You know, looking into the future. And just real quickly, it doesn't have to be a real long process, depending upon how you define that. That's something that if everything was aligned right with the funding, that could happen in 3-4 years, or maybe even a little less. So I think it has real promise, and it's something that we certainly, you know, are looking at.
Okay. A final point here about a dedicated source of revenue. We've tried that with a gas tax referendum recently, several years ago. Just since we're at the end of the show, quick thoughts on a complex subject.
A complex subject, we can look at partners, how we fund things differently, and do our capitalized maintenance with our federal funding. You know, we can look at ad valorem, we can look at you know, the sales tax, we can look at gas tax, but you know, the main thing is showing that by doing any of these things, there's a benefit to the entire community. There's a cost benefit. And how we sell that over the course of time to make that work is going to be key for the future.
From the other places you've worked, what are are there dedicated sources of revenue, and what are they in those areas?
Dedicated sources of revenue are difficult in most transit systems. Some have some success in working through the impact fees, when new businesses develop, and then how you do the ad valorem tax on those businesses in the future. It doesn't have to be a lot of money to the business, but incrementally it's something that will help transit. So there has been success in a lot of areas, and I believe that Memphis is a perfect place to look and do some things and actually lead the way in showing new ways to fund transit for the future.
Is it necessarily a gas tax addition? Or?
It is not.
Okay.
There's many options to look at.
All right. All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in a very relatively short amount of time here. I want to thank you both for being here. That's our program for this evening. Eric Barnes will be back next week. I'm Bill Drees. Good night. Thanks for watching Behind the Headlines.